Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Tengo un poquito español, so I'm going to resort to English. It's been many years since I've been in Mexico, and it's a real pleasure to be back here with you all. I also want to thank Adolfo Rodriguez and his team, Julieta, who've been very supportive and have done an incredible amount of work putting together this program. I've worked on programs before, and I know how much effort it takes to find the right people to pull them together. And the mix and the blend of locations we come from, our backgrounds, and the topics that we're addressing was truly a huge task. So my great admiration and thanks to them. It's been a great pleasure to actually sit through the sessions. This is one of the more interesting meetings I've had a chance to attend in the course of the year, and I was very impressed with the topics picked for this particular program today. I'm going to tell you my glasses broke 30 minutes ago, so I can read, but you're a little fuzzy. So I can see you, sort of. And I'm going to see if I can manage my slides. Let me begin by saying that the perspective that I bring today is one that represents three different careers that I've had. My first career was an academic librarian. I was the director of a small college library. My second career was working with many different libraries in a sales job for a subscription agent, back in the war. And then I worked with the Thomson, which creates the citation indexes, for 2 years. And that gave me a really broad view of libraries across all of North America. When I left Thomson at the end of 2 years, I started my consulting business, and that was 17 years ago. And my view is actually, I'm still active in library groups, and I'm active in publishing organizations. I'm past president of the Society for Scholarly Publishing. So I worked with a lot of the societies whose members are faculty, both in North America and around the world, and I help them with their publications programs, and I've done reports for the Association of Research Libraries, and have worked with other libraries as they have worked on grant-funded projects to see how they can continue to support them after the grant runs out. And these are projects such as digitizing Ramondo Rose, which is a 14th century French manuscript, of which there are 300 in the world. And that was for Johns Hopkins University. So projects have been really interesting, and they've given me, I think, a relatively unusual perspective, or unique perspective. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts that I have about where I see us today. I'll tell you, I still consider myself a librarian. When I took my first job outside of libraries, somebody said, well, how does it feel to no longer be a librarian? I wouldn't know how that felt. I'm still a librarian. It's a process that when you go to library school, or I went to library school, there's a culture of libraries that I left with, and I have in common with my colleagues and friends. And it's a view we share, it's a commitment to information resources, and I think we all feel that we're doing this for a greater good, for a higher purpose. And sometimes that puts us at a distance from other programs that could offer us skills that would also be useful to us. So when I was in sales and I spoke about marketing, most people thought marketing was sales and promotions, and as we know from our last speaker, it's much more than that. But I'll also say that marketing is understanding users and what they want. So if you have had the opportunity to work on a reference desk, and you know the questions that you have to ask someone to find out what it is they're looking for. The classic joke when I got out of school was, well, what are you looking for? A book on Shakespeare. Well, what does that look like? Well, I think it was red. So trying to understand, Shakespeare, which one? Trying to understand what users really want compared to what they present with the information and the vocabulary they have to present their question really takes some skill. And it's that skill that is still useful in all the market research I do for organizations, and it's a skill that I think serves us as librarians well in terms of understanding today how our users are changing and how the information they need is also changing very dramatically. So when I left school, the library was the heart of the university. And it has stayed that way up until recently. For many, many years. It warms my heart to see a library. And I've seen many different ones and many different types, academic, public, corporate libraries. They obviously were the storehouses of knowledge. And I'll share with you something a friend said to me a long time ago. They said, you know, libraries and librarians are the only profession that shares the same name as the building they work in. And what that said to me was we pretty strongly identify with what a library is. It's a collection. So we're very attached to our collections because a big library is a good library, or even a large collection. We've got a lot to offer. It's a lot to be proud of and makes us feel good. But as things have changed and that has become more digital, it's a little harder to see that because we're becoming more transparent. So my observations on libraries through the years, and this is kind of a decade-by-decade view, was in the 1970s we had technical services, which was about the collection, and public services, which was about the users. Then in the U.S. in the 1980s, we had better budgets, and we were able to build collections. We began to have associate university librarians for collection management, and they held the budget. And it was distributed across all the reference librarians who then worked with it as liaisons, worked with the different departments on campus. As time went by, we hit the 1990s. The market changed. Actually, there was an instance of an exchange rate differential. So the dollar dropped, the price that American libraries were paying for their content skyrocketed, went way high in just a few months. Librarians didn't understand what was happening, and they got very upset, and that put them on edge. When the publishers didn't help, they were buying up other publishers, they were getting bigger, and if they could make money on a dollar exchange rate, they do that. And libraries began to get resentful about that. So the whole pushback, I think the whole scholarly communications conversation came out of the anger and the upset that librarians had, feeling that publishers were taking advantage of them, and feeling that they were getting between the librarian and their ability to build a collection that would serve them, because they couldn't afford them to buy everything they needed to buy. Well, it wasn't too long after that the web came along, and we became a little more transparent to our funders. And suddenly we had associate university librarians for assessment. Now, assessment was helping to provide data that would demonstrate that, yes, we were doing a good job, yes, we were accomplishing our objectives. And then since then, in the last 6 years, things have changed, I think, for economic reasons. And now the titles I see are associate university librarians for research and for education, and also a new one that I really like, collection strategy, collection strategist. And that one is, as it was defined by New York Public Library, actually covered an entire spectrum. It wasn't just about buying content, and do I buy what I can in digital form, and what do I buy in print. It was, all right, we have this special collection that falls in the subject area that I'm responsible for, and I have to decide, I'm going to digitize it, and I have to decide how I'm going to fund that. And maybe it's in dance. I'm in New York. We have some great donors in dance. Now I have to work with the donors. And oh, by the way, there's these interest groups out here that want to use the collection. And now I have to make it available to them. So suddenly you had the positions, and my mind had always been collections and use. Now this position is covering the entire spectrum. Everything from the point at which content is created or digitized, all the way through to the people who are interested in consuming it, how they're going to use it, how do you communicate what's available to them, how do you access it. So it was almost as though that collection represented the entire range of tasks. I thought this cartoon was cute. Basically, it says, it's a library clinic. It's hard to read this now. You know, the early version of the World Wide Web. And when librarians were telling me, the provost said to them, well, why do we need to buy materials? It's all free on the web, right? I began to think that this cartoonist had understood what was going on for us. But then I think in 2008, this is that reference to 6 years ago, there was a turning point. I mean, the landscape was set for some changes with the web. But this was like an earthquake. It was a massive jolt to the system. When the markets crashed in 2008, everything kind of froze. People were afraid to spend money. The state was going to come and take the budgets back. Libraries began to realize that if their budgets were restored, they weren't going to be spending them in the way they would spend them before. That life was going to be fundamentally different. And there was a term that was used, the new normal. And it came out of the economic sector, but it actually was used a lot at library conferences. Somebody would say, well, you know, the new normal is my budget's not going to be restored, and we're going to have to look at how we can meet our users' needs in a different way. The other thing that really registered on me is I went to a meeting at the American Library Association conference, and someone stood up and said, here is the list of things we're going to stop doing. I'd never heard anybody say that. We're going to stop doing these things because of all the things we could do. We don't think that this is going to be as useful to our users. So yes, we have some people doing them, but we're going to change their jobs. And we're going to quit doing these things because there's some other things over here that we want to do, and we don't have the time and the resources to do it if we don't stop doing something else. Librarians have always been very good about sacrificing ourselves. We'll just keep working. We're we're out there to accomplish the objective. So when somebody said they were going to stop something, that's a different conversation. Now, we weren't the only ones. There are challenges facing education as well. And I want to expand this conversation into the ecosystem, into the broader environment in which libraries, academic librarians live. Because higher education is faced with challenges that they have not been faced with before. When we were the heart of the university, their budgets were good. Money was coming to the door, our collections grew. After 2008, when people began to realize that a lot of content was available in digital form, and that life was going to be different, they had to figure out what different looked like. They had to think about how to serve their users when the collection was all electronic. And just for example, the medical library at Johns Hopkins University, the physical library, is closed. It is no longer. The library director worked herself out of that space because they needed the space for other people in the medical school. And Hopkins is a world-class medical library. The University of Pennsylvania used to have an engineering library. It went down to a reading room, and now it's turned into something else altogether when they built the new engineering building. So it's not necessarily about the space we're in or the physical collection. It's about space. If you can think about our skills and what we can do in space, that's what I think is changing very dramatically. So these challenges facing education, this is a report that was released on October 14th, 2 weeks ago. And it was a conversation at a meeting. William G. Bowen is head of is retired, but for years was head of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. I've worked on a lot of Mellon-funded grants. They give a lot of money to libraries and to museums, to digitize content, to look at new and different ways of working together, to sponsor collaboration. They're very committed to the goals that we're committed to, and in fact, if anything, the arts and humanities are really core to their mission. He also is past president of Princeton University, which is one of our Ivy Leagues. So here's somebody who is a core academic at their heart and soul, and they're looking at the future of education, which is the environment in which we work, and saying, you know, it looks like, now this is North America, so these rules, these observations may not apply here in Mexico. But they're concerned that in North America, we have peaked the number of graduates coming out of college. And if you look at the demographics, we have baby boomers, the boomers in North America, baby boom bubbles after World War II, this huge number of babies were born, that they went to college all about the same time. And then their children or children's children made another big bubble. And that's what was coming through higher education over the last 10 years. Kids were competing to get into schools and not able to get the first five choices, and they were the valedictorian, the top student in their class when they left high school. So now we're looking at the number of graduates potentially declining. We're also looking at it taking longer to get a degree. It shocked me to think that less than 40% complete a degree by the age of 22. 22 used to be the average age of a college graduate. That's changing. It's really uncomfortable to look at the disparities in the socioeconomic status and what that means for the future of students being able to get into college. And then there's this matter of affordability. And this was another byproduct of the crash of 2008. College is too expensive. That's unfortunately the growing conversation. In the U.S., we have these conversations about student debt. We're happy to make loans to students, and now they're virtually crushing students. You can declare bankruptcy, but your loans will not be forgiven, your college loans. So this is saddling the next generation with a huge amount of debt. Of course, at the time this generation got their degrees was the crash and there were no jobs. So now they have no jobs, no income, they're living at home, and they have a huge amount of debt that they have to pay off with a variable interest rate. It's not a pretty picture, and a lot of parents are looking at that and saying, well, maybe a college education isn't worth what it once was. Maybe we really can't afford to send you off to college because how are you going to pay for it? We can't afford to pay for it. And when you get out, you don't want to be saddled with debt for the rest of your life. So that's not a healthy conversation to have for someone like me who's worked in and around higher education all my life and see that I want more people to be going to college, not fewer. So what's important about all of this? Well, for years, we have managed the libraries that we've run really well. We've been good stewards of our budgets. We've built wonderful collections. We have served our students and faculty well. But that's not enough anymore. We now have to be involved in conversations that take us outside of our comfort zone. In managing up, we have to understand the conversations that the provosts are having when there's a declining enrollment, may not be enough tuition dollars. Every researcher has to turn in 10 grant applications to get a research grant that they used to only turn in 5 applications for. So it's not to paint a grim picture, it's just to say how profoundly things are changing in terms of the ecosystem that we live and work in. And I think about education on the prior slide were taking place actually also involved online education. And people were there from Coursera, which was the first, you've heard of MOOCs, M-O-O-C-S. The Stanford professor who had 300,000 students in one class because it was online. Those are the conversations where they're looking at, all right, if we can't afford education the way it's been done, maybe we can do something with these online programs to be able to afford to give people an education. Now the reality is that the jobs that are available in North America today either are service level jobs at a McDonald's or you have to have a college degree. It's not too much in between. That's going away. And the college degree is needed because if you work in a plant, you have to understand how the electronics work and the machines. You used to just be a mechanic and you could go in and you could fix the machine and they'd be back in business because you only get responsibility for a piece of it. Now they want electrical engineers because major companies like Siemens in Germany are selling systems that are absolutely huge, and someone's responsible for troubleshooting it when it goes down. I mean, the new cars these days are all electronic. And it's not a mechanic who works on them, it's somebody who has tools and can test the engine and figure out what's wrong with it and replace the circuit board. So having those skill sets calls for more education than students have in high school. So education is very important. And the provosts are having to make difficult decisions. And I think it is very important for librarians to be able to speak their language, to understand what their challenges are. Understanding our users has been mentioned earlier, and that's also an extremely important conversation to have. I did a focus group at the University of Pennsylvania, and we asked faculty what more could the library be doing for them. And one of them said, I really have trouble with all the PDF documents. I can't seem to get them organized. They're not easy to use. When I need one, I have to go print it off again. 2 years later, I'm in another conversation with the young PhD doctoral students out of Germany who created Mendeley. And Mendeley gives you a place to store your PDFs. Not only that, it does the work that the bibliographic tools, RefWorks, and the citation tools used to do for us. So we have to talk to our students and the faculty and understand what their challenges are. Now I'm going to have to speed up to keep the time. So I want to share with you 3 examples of what I see that strike me as being really innovative. At the University of Minnesota, Wendy Luget, who's the head of the library there, gave a stunning presentation at the JSTOR meeting, JSTOR Ethica meeting, talking about how they were using analytics. They took their data, the university's data on students, and basically were able to demonstrate that they identified 13 touch points in the library, and that if students had touch points in the library, they used the library anyway, they had higher GPAs. This is consistent. Each one of these is a different college. So whether it was the School of Management, School of Education, Food and Agriculture, Biological Sciences, College of Design, College of Liberal Arts, the College of Science and Engineering, it was consistent. Being connected with a library made a difference in their performance. And here you see it across the number of touch points. Now here are the number of students, and as you go up the curve here, here's the GPA over here. And here are the number of library. Now those library touch points are checking in for an online journal, checking out a book, scheduling a session, attending a library training session. We have one outlier over here. But you can see across the board that, on average, the more people interacted with the library, the better their GPA. How did they do this? They took data on content use, data on access to databases, and data on services for the library, and used it with characteristics that applied to students. What college were they in? What was their degree? Were they a faculty member, a student, undergraduate, or graduate student? And then they crunched the numbers, and they came up with a conversation they could have with their provost. If you fund the library and the more that students use it, we'll get your students graduated with better GPAs. Second example, University of Utrecht. This woman, Simone Kortikos, gave a talk at a meeting in the UK, and what they did at the University of Utrecht was to consider buying library discovery tools. Theirs was very old, they had made it themselves. Instead of doing that, they basically chose to focus on delivering the content, not on the discovery. They looked at their use data and realized that the bulk of their users were coming to Google Scholar, and the citation indexes, Scopus, and they decided that they didn't need a library discovery tool. They were going to focus instead. They said people found content elsewhere. They were going to focus on making sure that their users had access. And the last example is something called the Becker model, out of Washington University in St. Louis. And it basically is for the medical school there. Most faculty are evaluated for promotion and tenure based on their citation rates of their journals. They expanded this conversation all the way to the point of community. The elements were, did they advance knowledge? But clinical implementation, how was it translated, economic benefit, and community benefit. The punchline for me was, were they able to extend somebody's life? If their research affected lifespan, now talk about scientific research impact. That's something that you can sell to a state legislature or a funder. If you can actually save lives. Now obviously not everybody's in medicine. Nonetheless, it's learning how to take what we do and translate it for the people who support it. So going forward, I would just say, encourage you to have curiosity, to have the courage to do things in a different way and to explore these conversations, and to collaborate with your users, collaborate with your funders. Thank you very much.